Hello, we start with that car crash in Suffolk in which a young schoolteacher was killed by a drunk driver.
The victim, Sarah Lee, was 24. She just started her career in education. The man behind the wheel was well over the legal limit. Today, Sarah's father spoke of his terrible loss, and he also asked this: why don't the friends of drunk drivers do more to stop them?
For Sarah Lee's family, there is a terrible void which can never be filled. But there's also a tremendous pride in what she achieved. She was a talented artist, and this is just a taste of her work.
Couldn't be bothered, just didn't feature in Sarah's vocabulary. She was somebody who was just so energetic and gave her all.
Sarah worked at the Royal Hospital School at Holbrook. She was on her way home after setting up an exhibition of her work there when tragedy struck last month on the road between Stutton and Brantham. An inquest ruled that Sarah had been unlawfully killed by the driver of the other car, Matthew Anderson, who was also 24 and who also died. The inquest was told that at the time of the crash, Matthew Anderson had been almost 2.5 times the legal drink-drive limit. He'd been driving at speeds between 60 to 80 miles an hour. He'd been on the wrong side of the road, and he'd been asked to leave a local pub because of the state he was in. Sarah's partner, Richard Day, who was a passenger in the car and emerged with minor injuries, has set up a website with the family as a tribute to what he calls his beloved Sarah. They're all determined to keep the memory alive and to prevent further tragedies, and that means everyone being prepared to take action if they need to.
We need to take some responsibility for helping to prevent our friends, our families from committing road crimes. And there will be silent heroes who have prevented accidents because they have challenged others who have considered drinking and driving. I think it's very important that we do all we can to prevent that sort of thing from happening in the future. I think Sarah would be happy to think that a positive message comes out of this situation. If in some way her death raises the issue of drink driving and prevents another accident, that's something that Sarah would wish to be a legacy of hers.
Sarah, they say, was an inspiration who lived life to the full. She was loved beyond words. She will never be forgotten, nor will that radiant smile. Kevin Birch, BBC Look East, in Suffolk.
So what would you do if you saw a friend reaching for their car keys after a drinking session? Here are some views from Northampton this afternoon.
I'd take the car keys off them. I wouldn't let them drive because you hear on the news about people dying through drink driving. It's wrong.
I'd basically just tell them not to drive and either block their car in so they couldn't even get it out anyway, or take their keys off them, or inform the pub that he's already drunk and he's driving home, and see if they'll do anything about it, really.
Probably take their keys off of them and just tell them not to, get them in a taxi or something.
We try our best to stop them, but it's not always a lot you can do sometimes, is there?
Yeah, it depends how much they've had to drink and how determined they are they're going to drive.
Well, let's talk now to Christine Matkin from the Campaign Against Drinking and Driving and her daughter Leanne. Christine, your son was also killed by a drink driver. We heard there people saying that they would try their best to stop people, but do you think we all need to take more responsibility to try and stop these things happening?
We probably do, but I think if friends are out drinking together, they've probably just had as much drink as the driver anyway.
Leanne, you're a young woman. You've lost your brother to a drink driver. How do you feel when you see your contemporaries drinking and then planning to drive?
It makes me very, very, very angry. Losing my brother, it could have stopped for the sake of a £5 taxi fare, and young people don't realise the consequences that they'll put on other people's family and having to live with killing somebody.
So do you think, Christine, that's what it's about? It's that people don't realise the consequences, and there's a culture of acceptance, or do you think the penalties need to be tougher?
I think the penalties need to be tougher. I mean, the man that killed my son, he'll be out this year. He's out in July. He would have served 2.5 years in prison. I mean, that's nothing. He's ruined our lives, took our son, and he'll be out enjoying his in July.
The Chief Constable of Cambridgeshire has said this week that the only way to improve the situation is to ban all alcohol before driving, to make the situation clear. Leanne, do you think that would make a difference, and do you think that's actually achievable?
It could help. People would know exactly what the limit was. Some people don't understand how much they can actually have to drink, and it affects people differently. But I think that could be quite tough for them to actually police. I think it's the sentences that need to be made tougher so that people are aware if they do go out, drink and decide to drive, they're going to get punished for it. And at the moment, they don't really seem to be that bothered. It's just a toss-up on the night, do they, don't they? And they should really go out thinking, I can't drive, I need to get a taxi.
Christine, it's been 3 years since you lost your son. How are you coping now? Is it getting any less painful for you?
It doesn't. It doesn't get any easier at all. I don't think it ever will, to be honest.
Well, thank you both for coming on the programme and being brave enough to speak to us tonight. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Suffolk-based agency, which hired the out-of-hours Dr Daniel Ubani, said today it should never have taken him on. The company, Take Care Now, said its selection process failed to notice his shortcomings. The admission came at the inquest into the death of a patient treated by Dr Ubani.
The Executive Medical Director of Take Care Now, Dr James Kennedy, said in a small minority of cases it used locum agencies to supply doctors. They had to have a valid registration with the General Medical Council and pass a series of other checks. He admitted Dr Daniel Ubani's CV should have rung alarm bells. He was in his mid-60s with a background in anti-ageing medicine. Dr Kennedy said if he'd seen the CV, he wouldn't have employed Dr Ubani without significant further investigation. At TCN's clinic in Ipswich, Dr Ubani's planned induction was cut short, with no observation of him dealing directly with patients. The inquest heard that Dr Ubani had flown into Stansted Airport on the Friday morning. He'd then driven to see the locum agency in Essex. Then he'd driven again to Ipswich for his induction. It was around 10 o'clock that night he left Ipswich to drive to Newmarket, but he didn't arrive at his B&B until around midnight. At this, the coroner suggested the result could have been great fatigue for a doctor due to start a 12-hour shift at 8 a.m. the next morning. Dr Kennedy said all GPs worked prolonged and intense hours. It was the duty of every clinician to make sure he was fit for work. Dr Ubani, in hindsight, may have overcommitted himself. Dr Ubani injected David Gray with a fatal dose without seeking guidance. TCN said it couldn't explain why any clinician would go that far beyond their confidence without first taking advice.
He shouldn't have been doing their job. He was an anti-ageing doctor in Germany. We've got no evidence he had any GP experience or training, and he's allowed to come over here and work without supervision in general practice on his first shift.
The medical director of TCN said Dr Ubani had blamed tiredness, stress and a lack of experience with diamorphine as contributing to the tragic mistake. Dr Kennedy said its systems at the time hadn't revealed the doctor's shortcomings. He said the board of TCN still had concerns about the workings of the GMC register. Kim Riley, BBC Look East, Wisbech.
There's lots more to come on Look East, including how the Prince of Wales is helping problem teenagers have a bit more faith in the future.
We meet the sailor from Suffolk